Hello and welcome, or welcome back to Language Culture and Dr. Lou. And so today I'm going to react to this web article from Global Language Services about 40 plus surprising language facts to blow your mind. And and by the way, I when I did my channel's first live stream event, it was actually about surprising facts about languages. And so if you're interested in watching that, I'm going to include a link to it in the description of this video. So feel free to check it out. And so, of course, you might know I'm a linguist already. That's why my handle is at Language Dr. Lou. And so I haven't really read through this web article very closely because I wanted my reactions to be nice and fresh on the video for everybody. But I did skim through it pretty quick just to make sure there's nothing entirely inappropriate, right? So that much I did. And so this article is again titled 40 plus surprising language facts to blow your mind. And so I don't think my reactions will be blowing your mind, but maybe some of these facts will. We will see. And and maybe, yeah, I will likely learn a little something myself. So hopefully you do too. Anyway, so let's see what's the first fact they want to talk about among the 40 plus facts. Of course, we're starting with there is a language spoken by only three people in the world. Oh, this one I already knew, and that's included in the live stream that I just mentioned, actually. Busu, which is a language spoken in a southern Bantoid in Cameroon. And it was reported back in the 90s, I think people went there and discovered there were only eight native speakers of that language in the world. And when they went back about a decade later to report to check out the situation, that language was down to only three native speakers in the world. And so everybody understands that that qualifies this language as endangered, but it's very much beyond endangered. It's, I would call it critically endangered. And yeah, because as soon as a language has no native speakers left, we consider it a dead language. So so this language is seriously close to its demise, which is a shame because every language carries with it a bunch of cultural wisdom and cultural knowledge gained by the culture of folks who speak that language. So it's, yeah, but it's sad, and it's also interesting that there could be a language that's spoken by only three people in the world, because after all, languages are for communicating with each other, and it doesn't seem very practical to have a language that you can only communicate with two other people with, right? Anyway, so that's the first fact. And yeah, I already knew a little bit about that one, so that one didn't exactly blow my mind, but still I find it pretty damn fascinating. And the second fact here, over 300 languages spoken in the US. Let's take the fourth fact out of here for a second. But and it's true that in the US, uh, we're considered to be one of the most diverse countries in the world, because we have settlers, immigrants from so many different places. But that's true of most countries. You have immigrants living there too. But in the US, we have particular diversity. And so that means it's not too surprising that the US population collectively speaks over 300 languages. But my reaction to this is that they're forgetting New York City. We say they're saying over 300 languages, but heck, in New York City alone, there's over 800 languages spoken. So, yeah, I would say the US is linguistically much more diverse than they're giving it credit for. Um, but yeah, hundreds and hundreds of languages is pretty amazing for a country that, although it doesn't have any official language by law exactly, always sort of considers English, its main language, and English is a language that pretty much crosses out other languages pretty easily. So good for French Canadian friends for holding on all these years in face of English. But yeah, so over 300 languages spoken in the US. I can verify that and actually add to it and say, oh, there's hundreds and hundreds of languages, more than that, in fact. So it's a shame that Americans, on average, often don't speak more than one language, but altogether as a country, we got hundreds. Anyway, and so the next fact is there is no official language in the US, and this could be surprising to a lot of people. And by the way, I did a video on this too, and the title was a question: is English really the official language of the US? Uh, and maybe, yeah, I will put a link to that video also in the description of this one if you want to check it out. And this is true that there's no official language in the US, not by law, but in March of last year of 2025, Donald Trump, President Trump, that is, made an executive order declaring English to be the official language of the US. But executive orders don't really have the full force of law behind them because an executive order can easily be undone as soon as another president takes over. They could do an executive order nullifying or changing the previous ones. So it's not really the official language of the US until Congress passes a law making it so. And the fact is, also in March of 2025, in the Congress, they did propose a law. They proposed, well, a bill at that point to make English the official language in accordance with Trump's executive order. But really, that little bill went immediately into two committees and has been stuck there ever since. And that was like 10 months ago. So who knows if it will ever pass, because there have been other attempts by Congress to make English the official language, but none of them has ever passed into law. So we still, in my opinion, have no official language in the US, even though we all really think of English as the main one here. But and on top of that, minority languages are also protected, and some states have more than one official language, right? So no real official language in the US, not until Congress makes some moves on that. And so this next fact is the most official languages. Huh. What do they mean by that? Oh, America could take a leaf from South Africa's book. They can't pick one official language, but the South Africans have 11 languages to choose from. And that's true. We know of South Africa as an English speaking country. It was one of the many places colonized by the British. And so English is one of their official languages, but there are 10 other official languages to choose from in South Africa. So to me, that's interesting. And yeah, so South Africa with 11 official languages has more official languages than any other country that I know of. Anyway, so that to me is pretty surprising. We English speakers usually think of South Africa as an English speaking country, but there's so many other languages spoken there and officially and all that. So that to me is always pretty cool. And languages can become extinct is the next fact. That I totally agree with. That's one of my specialties within language is language shift and language death. Language shift is the process by which a speech community goes from speaking one language, its heritage language, over to speaking another language. And often the first language variety involved kind of dies out in the process. So yeah, languages can become extinct. And this brings me back to Bushu, the language we mentioned earlier in a southern cantonoid of Cambodia that only has three speakers of it, and so absolutely, that's why I call that language critically endangered because it's really about to go extinct, pretty much. So yeah, languages absolutely they're spoken, they're learned and shared, they evolve, they grow, and then sadly, eventually they obsolesce. So obsolescing, that's, well, dying pretty much. You're on the way to dying. And so there are over 200 recorded languages that are extinct. Like, for instance, Latin is one that comes to mind because, yeah, sure, well, the Vatican still uses it and it's still taught in schools. There's no native speakers of Latin anymore. That's not even a thing because instead, what we have are all the Romance languages. And that's part of how languages become extinct too, is a language splits up into many dialects, and then these dialects grow different enough from each other to become, instead of one language, a whole language family. So Latin's dead, but we do have the Romance languages, which are incredibly widely spoken in this world on many continents. Actually, there's a Romance language spoken on every continent, every one of the inhabited continents, anyway, and usually more than one. But anyway, so that's interesting that they're recognizing here that languages become extinct, and that supports the theory of language as a living being, of having the same life cycle as a living being, although generally it lasts a lot longer than a human lifespan, but still. So half of the world's population speaks more than one language. That doesn't surprise me, although in the US, the average number of languages spoken by per person is a lot less than two, is 1 point something. So we don't speak a lot of languages per person here in the US, but in most places, uh, the average is a little larger than that because half of the world's population speaks two or more languages each. They're using the term bilingual, but bi implies they only speak two languages. There are plenty of folks out there who speak more than two anyway. So yeah, that tracks for me. And now the next one is that the Bible is the world's most translated document. Hey, that is unsurprising to me because of how well how many languages the Bible has been translated into. And you know what's more surprising to me is the other fact they mentioned within the paragraph. The second most translated document in the world is the story of Pinocchio. You know, Pinocchio, the puppet who is going to become a boy and all that. Yeah, that to me is more interesting that Pinocchio is so widely translated. And but yeah, I'm not surprised that it takes a second seat to the Bible in that respect, because after all, Christianity is the world's most popular religion. There's more Christians than people practicing any other religion in this world. So they're going to need to translate the Bible into probably even more languages, I guess. No, next fact, the Romance languages are some of the most spoken languages globally. Yeah, that does not really surprise me at all because the fact is, like I mentioned, Latin was spoken during the Roman Empire, and they took over pretty much, well, they invaded pretty much most of Europe. And then in Europe, you had colonial powers going ahead and bringing the Romance languages that developed from Latin in most of Europe, um, and especially in Western Europe. Um, and they brought those to other continents and all that. So it doesn't really surprise me the most. And I'm glad they mentioned the five most widely spoken of the Romance languages, which are French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian. And a lot of people forget that Romanian is a Romance language because we think of, well, French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese. For those in Romanian, we think, oh, that must be a Slavic language related to Russian. But if you get it, Roman Empire, Rome, Romania, Romanian, it all linguistically tracks. It's right in the name of that language that it has a connection to Rome, right? Anyway, but yeah. So the world's smallest alphabet. Oh, this one I've heard of already. Well, first we'll talk about the smallest, then the largest. And the Rotokas use the Papuan language, which uses the world's smallest alphabet, and it consists of only 11 letters. And it's kind of funny because that language, what this means to me is it doesn't have many sounds either. Like most alphabets include a lot more letters than that because phonetic alphabets supposed to have a new letter for each different sound you're going to say in the language. And yeah, 11 doesn't seem very many, does it? And now the world's biggest alphabet, the largest one, and this is probably connected to, again, phonetic type alphabets, not like Mandarin and all the hundreds of characters that they have there. And so among these phonetic alphabets, the biggest one in use is in Khmer, which I'm not sure how to say the name of that language. See, this is why I should have read this all over more carefully, but I wanted my reactions to be fresh for you. So, um, and yeah, that's a language we used in Cambodia. So it's funny that Cambodia has a language with only three speakers left that's almost on its way out. And they also have the language with the biggest alphabet in the world. That to me is pretty cool. And now, what's next? We got all languages are influenced by each other. Yeah, absolutely. And I would totally agree with this because often how a language gets a new word is it borrows that word from another language. And so, of course, this means there has to be bilinguals, people who speak the first language and the second and all that. But it's almost all languages come into contact with other languages because you have people who speak more than one. And things like pronunciation can be influenced as well as spelling, and especially the lexicon, meaning you can get words. If your language doesn't have a word for something, for a certain concept, and you learn one in another language, oftentimes, yeah, that new word ends up being brought into your language. So now your language has a word for that concept. This reminds me of how Québécois French borrowed the word fun from English because French didn't have that word exactly. They have amusant, which can mean funny or fun in the sense of, yeah, it's more like amusant, funny, or amusing. But really, the Quebecois just took the word fun and made it their own too. So that's pretty cool. Um, and yeah, so languages are not islands. They don't exist on their own because they're spoken by humans who interact with other humans. And So unsurprisingly, pretty much any language has been influenced by at least one other, probably multiple other languages. Like for English, I think French is probably having the most influence on English at all, as well as Latin. Latin is a savant language that a lot of other languages are borrowing from still, even millennia after its demise. Anyway, so yeah, all languages are influenced by each other. I agree wholeheartedly. So there's one mystery language in the world. I wonder what that could all be about. So, contrary to the above, Basque is the one mystery language in the world, as it has not been influenced by any other language in existence that we know of. Excuse me. And that reminds me of how there is a language family that we linguists suppose probably existed about 6,000 years ago. And that's called Proto-Indo-European. And I think the Basque sticks out as like the only language in Europe which is not traced back to that language family, Proto-Indo-European. And why is that? Well, the Basque folks are pretty isolationist, and they live in the mountains, the Pyrenees Mountains, which are on the border of France and Spain. So they're isolated in their mountain dwellings and all that, and they really make sure not to interact with other people, with outsiders and whatnot. And so that to me makes sense that Basque would not be influenced by other languages so much and remain a mystery to everybody else, right? Yeah, absolutely. And then English is the most dominant language in the world. That's interesting to me because, well, A, I'm an English speaker, so that's kind of cool. But B, um, English doesn't have the most native speakers in the world. The number of native speakers of English is far less than Mandarin, for instance. But if you include all the people who speak English as a second language on top of the native speakers of English, then we do have the most speakers in the world, with like 1.5 billion people in the world speaking English, which makes English much more widely spoken than Mandarin, for instance, which is, I think, the second most widely spoken in the language. But they have a lot more native speakers and not as many foreign language speakers. Probably because anyone who speaks a Western language, like a European language, would find Mandarin pretty incredibly to learn. And we're always saying uh, that translating from Chinese is so difficult, if not impossible. uh, but yeah, so English, I can concur that it's the most dominant language in the world in the sense that more people speak English than any other language in the world. But still, 1.5 billion speakers, that's not even a quarter of the world's population. So we need a lot more linguistic diversity for that. And English is digitally dominant. Yeah, I would agree with that in part because English is so widely used on the internet. Although German, Spanish, and French are all pretty widely used, they're all within the top five most used languages on the internet, but English comes out on top. And then on top of using English on the internet, other digital documents, even ones that might not be so easily available online, those are also stored in English. So yeah, if you want to be able to read as many digital documents as possible, English is definitely the way to go. Um, but then again, French, Spanish, and German. all pretty widely used online. So English is the official language of air and water. I wonder what they mean by that exactly. The official language of air and water. Okay, as the most dominant language, it is of no surprise that English is the official language of both the Navy and airline industry. Well, yeah, I mean, I hope we're not just meaning the uh, Navy itself, but also, shipping on boats and stuff like that. That's to me, uh, it's not so surprising that English is an official language for airline industry as well as the Navy. I had a boss not too long ago who was Quebecoise, so her native language was French, and she didn't speak any English growing up in Quebec. A lot of people think all the French Canadians speak English too, but that's not true. A lot of them don't speak English. But anyway, um, she told me how did she learn English? Because she became a flight attendant, a stewardess for an airline company. And bang, she had to use a lot of English. And there you go. So I'm not all that surprised that we would call it the official language of air and water. But hey, uh, and now English is the most evolving language. That depends on what you mean on well, what sense you mean the most evolving language. I agree with what they're saying here because every year English language dictionaries get thousands of more words added, like roughly 4,000 words added per year. And that's a lot of words. And that's a lot of changing in the language and your vocabulary. And it's funny that you have so many words, but in an average day, people don't use very many of them. And I think there is another fact about that a little later on, so I won't spoil it. Like I said, I skimmed this over, so I don't want to be too repetitive. English has the shortest grammatically correct sentence. Yeah, all we need is one word. If we're giving a command form, like the imperative form, all we need to make a full sentence in English is one word. And the sort of said word, go, only two letters. Go. If you're telling somebody go, as in get out of here or go for it, etc. Go. That's the sort of grammatically correct sentence. And I would be surprised if no other language has any imperative form uh, that's only one word for the whole sentence. That kind of surprises me, but according to this article here, absolutely go is the shortest grammatically correct sentence. At least I'm sure of it in English. But anyway, there's no hardest language to learn. That's funny. As someone who teaches in a language department, I teach French. But this is a question that I get a lot is what's the hardest language to learn? And my answer is relative. And why relative? Because it always depends on what is your native language. The closer another language is to your own, the more similar it is to your own language, the easier it is going to be to learn. And the more different a language is from your native language, the more difficult it's probably going to be to learn. And that's why English speakers are always saying, oh, we have a, uh, we think that, oh, Chinese must be so difficult. But that's mostly just because it's so different from English, right? And so there is no objectively hardest language to learn because it all depends on what is your native language. So you've got some languages are super hard to learn for speakers of Asiatic languages, But completely different languages will be really hard to learn for speakers of Germanic or Romance languages. Anyway, so that's interesting. And there's no easiest language to learn either. This goes back to what I was saying um, earlier. The easiest language to learn is not objective. It depends, it's relative. If you're looking for one that shares the most in common with your language, that's going to be the easiest one for you to learn. Um, but that's not the same for everybody, right? For a native speaker of some other language, that does not mean that the language that's the hardest for you to learn is going to be the same as the one that's hardest for them to learn, right? That's interesting to me. And now we're going a little further. And German was the first ever language printed. Huh. That's a better question for a historian, right? And so, of course, makes a lot of sense to me because the printing press, right? Books were finally being printed, not, transcribed by monks and whatnot, which was the old ways in medieval days. And before that, you had so many people using calligraphy and other stuff, transcribing languages by hand, transcribing works of literature by hand, rather. But then the printing press came along and so German was the first language used in printing a book, and that reminds me of the Protestant Revolution. I mean the Reformation, right? This was started by Martin Luther, who, by the way, was German, and sharing information, disseminating information by his time had become so much easier because of the printing press. And so, German guy, Martin Luther, spearheaded the whole Protestant Reformation. And so um, that's why we have a lot more denominations than just Catholic these days, right? Anyway, but yeah, so that's to me is interesting and has a link to the evolution of Christianity, in my opinion. But that's probably because I'm a little biased because I was born and raised Lutheran. That was the religion I grew up with. Anyway, and German has three genders. And guess what? German is not the only language with more than two genders in it. I have brought this up in conversations about gender when people are saying, oh, there's only two genders. Um, yeah, that depends what we mean exactly. Uh, Gender as a human social construct. Okay, that we can each have our own opinion on how many genders are involved in that. But as far as grammatical genders, like linguistic genders, lots of languages have more than two. Now, two genders is the most standard, masculine and feminine, but there are plenty of other languages that have also a neutered gender and even others beyond that. But still, yep, in languages, there's not always only two genders, right? They can be much more complicated than that. And German is the most spoken language in Europe. Huh. This one is actually surprising to me. I would not have guessed. I mean, I know that German is officially a language in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. But then again, in Switzerland, German is not even the only official language. Also, Italian and French are official languages there. Um, but yeah, this is surprising to me. And I think of because I find the United Kingdom, the British Isles, to be part of Europe, maybe as an American. That's my point of view. And we have already talked about how widely spoken English is in the world with more speakers than any other language worldwide. And so, uh, and I also know that French is an official language in multiple countries in Europe as well. And one other language that comes to mind when I think of what language has the most speakers in Europe, in European countries, Russian comes to mind, right? Russia, very big population, and it's not just in Russia where Russian is spoken. It's also in a lot of the former Soviet bloc countries, ones that once upon a time were part of the USSR. So that to me, yeah, that's surprising to me to learn that German is the most spoken language in Europe. I should look into that and find out by exactly which metrics is German most widely spoken in Europe. Yeah, that would be interesting for me to look into. If I find out anything super interesting about that, I will definitely share with you by making another video. So we'll see. And now Japanese is the fastest spoken language. Huh, that's cool. And I find Japanese to be very pretty, very melodic sounding, very pretty to me. But that's, of course, just my personal opinion. And it's true that languages do vary from each other in terms of how many are the how many words per minute are usually spoken in any given language. In a lot of languages, it's between 100 and 150 words per minute, but some languages have more and some have less. So Japanese has a lot more words per minute spoken, which makes them the faster language than any other. And that's because of how many words per minute people speak. And a lot of people don't realize this, but yeah, languages vary pretty wildly in terms of uh, how many words coming out of anybody's mouth in a given minute, right? And now, beyond that, Europe has the least languages. That's funny to me. With only 286 languages, Europe has the least amount of languages per continent globally. Huh, that's funny because I would think North America is less linguistically diverse than Europe, just because we have so many fewer countries than Europe. But then again, just earlier, we mentioned how the US is over 300 spoken languages, 800 if you include all the languages spoken in New York City, right? And also all of the indigenous languages, like the Native American languages and the First Nations languages in North America. So that to me is well, it's kind of refreshing to learn that for once, North America is not less diverse in terms of language and linguistics. So that's interesting. And by the way, the other end of the spectrum is Asia, where it's like 2,300 languages spoken on that continent. That's pretty impressive to me. And yeah, that's a lot more than we have in either of the continents in the Americas. And oh, picture of a person in space. Uh-oh. Oh, that's because Russia was the first language spoken in outer space. Yeah, it's true. A lot of people think that English must have been the first language spoken out in space because Americans were the first people to land on the moon, but people were exploring space long before we actually landed on the moon. Okay, so there was that. And of course, Russia has their cosmonauts and all that. And so apparently they were the first people speaking to each other in outer space. So Russian, yeah, I guess give credit where credit is due. Russian was the first language spoken in the outer space, not English like a lot of people believe. Huh. I mean, that's nice. I'm glad they included that one in there because I did not know this one before reading this little article here. And sign language varies country to country. You know, I did a video about Nicaraguan sign language, and some of the comments I got were about, I didn't know that sign language differed from one place to another. And these were, of course, comments from hearing people, from people who hear, who speak languages, who don't use sign languages. But but yeah, you would think if you don't understand any of the sign languages, sure, it could be easy to lump them all together as one thing. But the fact is, sign language are di- sign languages are different from country to country. And by the way, Nicaraguan sign language is one of the world's, if not the world's, the newest language in the world. And it was created pretty much on the playground by a bunch of deaf children in Nicaragua. So it was not really the teachers teaching this language to the kids, but a little more the other way around. And these days, we have adults who speak it too. But yeah, it's and what's interesting to me is that people would assume that American Sign Language would be in the same family, same language family as British Sign Language, but it's really not, because American Sign Language did not come from English, right? It's not because we speak English in both of these countries that our sign languages must be the same. Because how American Sign Language came to be was somebody from Paris actually uh, brought French Sign Language, standard Parisian, standard French Sign Language, to New York City and started a school there where he started developing American Sign Language. So American Sign Language is a lot closer related to French Sign Language than it is to British Sign Language or to other sign languages of different English speaking countries, surprisingly. And French is the main foreign language taught in the UK. Yeah, I did know this one too. Once upon a time, I think it was over a year ago, or almost a year ago, um, that I did a video about 10 surprising facts about French. And one of the facts included there is that French is the most widely taught foreign language in the United Kingdom. Although English is one of the most widely taught languages around the world, French is also taught in pretty much every country in the world. And in England itself, well, in the UK itself, French is the most widely taught foreign language, possibly because English is not taught as a foreign language there so much as a native language. And so, what else we got? Most Spanish speakers in the world. What's that one all about? Oh, Mexico sits atop the list for the most Spanish speakers in the world. Okay, that makes sense to me. Especially since Mexico City is one of the most populous cities in the world. In Mexico, very large country, especially if you look from north to south, pretty darn big. But you know what's surprising to me is the other little fact I mentioned is, you know what country has the second most number of Spanish speakers in the world? That would be in the US. That would be the United States of America. So no wonder we're having such a hard problem picking one official language, because we have people who speak other languages here too from different places. But yeah, that to me is kind of funny that we have more Spanish speakers in the US than anywhere else except for Mexico, because the US is not what one would consider a Spanish speaking country, especially because it's not an official language here. But yeah, there you go. So I guess Mexico has the most Spanish speakers in the world, but the US is number two. And Argentina has a surprising number of Welsh speakers. That is surprising to me because Wales, oh, well, Welsh is from Wales, and so it's a Celtic language with very old origins and a long history. But to me, when I think of Argentina, I don't think of folks from Wales living there, of Welsh being spoken there. But apparently, there are a lot of people who speak Welsh in Argentina because um, there's a lot of settlers, presumably from Wales, that inhabit the scenic um, Patagonian mountains. Huh. That's very cool. Very interesting to me that Argentina has so many Welsh speakers. I did not know that. It's raining, it's pouring. Oh, you know that little nursery rhyme? It's raining, it's pouring. Anyway, I won't go on from there. But Hawaii is the place in question here because the language Hawaiian, they have more than 200 different words for rain. That's interesting. Although it's not like we have only one word for rain in English. Sorry, my cat wants something to do with me. Say hello to Dewey. Say hi, Dewey. Anyway, but because of course we have raining, pouring, downpour, drizzling, and lots of words that touch on raining. But in English, we don't have anywhere near 200 words for that. That's surprising to me that Hawaiians have over 200 different words, but I guess a little less so because Hawaii is a bunch of islands. And island countries often get rained on a lot, like how London, England is known as a super rainy city, for instance. Um, but yeah, so that's interesting. So Hawaiians have a couple over 200 words, have a couple hundred words having to do with rain. That probably has to do with they have to describe it so much. Kind of like how we learned as little kids that Eskimos have so many different words for snow. So apparently Hawaiians already have a couple hundred words for rain. Oh, cryptophasia. This is a word that's near and dear to my heart because I am an identical twin. I have a twin brother. And cryptophasia, I don't know if you've ever heard of twin languages. Sometimes a pair of twins will develop their own little jargon, their own little language that only each other will understand. And so cryptophasia is a term for that. Crypto, because it's sort of encrypted. Nobody else can understand that. Um, and so that's the crypto part. It has nothing to do with death, but as encoding a little bit. And so, yeah, that word is near and dear to my heart. Again, cryptophasia. That's the word. Although myself and my twin brother Joe, I don't remember us ever having our own language that nobody else understood. We had some of our own games that nobody else understood and whatnot, but no language itself. But on the other hand, we both started learning French when we were really little. So maybe that's why we never developed a twin language because we were picking up another one. I don't know. Polyglot. There's an interesting word. Polyglot is a person who masters languages, and that absolutely hi Dewey. And that absolutely is true. And what I find is funny is how polyglot is not so clearly defined because a polyglot is someone who speaks not just one or two languages, but multiple languages. And why I say it's not very well defined is because it's a question of, okay, exactly how many languages do you have to speak to be able to consider the polyglot? And a lot of people who speak languages to differing degrees than each other. Like, for instance, I know a lot of French and a lot of English and quite a bit of Spanish and some Italian, but I know less Italian than I do Spanish, and I know less Spanish than I do English or French. Um, and so it's hard for me to say, am I really a polyglot or not? And plus, a lot of people there are people who speak a dozen languages, but not like super fluently, all of them. So, how many languages do you need to speak to be called a polyglot? And exactly how well do you need to speak each of these languages to call yourself a polyglot? To me, that's pretty easy and pretty confusing. But I do. I do like the term polyglot a little better than bilingual, because polyglot opens up the possibilities of so many more languages than just two. And the longest word without vowels. Okay, they're containing that um, rhythms. Rhythms is the longest word without any vowels. To me, that's funny because I guess they forgot that sometimes Y is a vowel in English. And the two Y's used in there are both serving vowel as a vowel. R, I, thems, I. They're making the sound I, rhythms, or I, and then but these are vowel sounds. So to me, I'm going to go ahead and disagree with that so-called fact that rhythms is a word without vowels because they totally forgot that Y can be a vowel too. And when it makes a vowel sound as opposed to just the Y, as in yes. Anyway, so there we go. I would disagree with that fact entirely. And the longest word with only four letters, I'm going to disagree with that fact too. Because they're claiming that the longest word with only four letters is senseless, right? SENL. Those are the only four letters in the word senseless. And so they're claiming that's the longest word with only four letters. That's wrong because you know what else is a word? Senselessness. It's spelled exactly like senseless, and then add four more letters, NESS, onto it out of the original four letters that the words had. So I'm going to disagree with this fact entirely because I don't think that senseless is the longest word with four letters. I think that senselessness is a longer word. And I would really have to think about it if I could find any words longer than senselessness. But this one is very easily um, um, disproven because all you got to do is open a dictionary and it will show you senselessness made with the same exact letters as senseless, SENL. Um, Senselessness is even longer. Anyway, that's pretty easy to disprove. So it's not just disagreeing with this fact, but I think it just proved it wrong. Anyway, so plurals only. What's this one all about? There are some words in the English language that actually only exist as plural, including scissors. That's right. It's funny because it's only one of them, but we call them scissors, a pair of scissors, right? But that must mean that scissor would be each blade on it. But no, that's I guess not the case. So glasses, oh, glasses in in the sense of spectacles, eyeglasses, that kind of sure. We always use those in the plural because no one wears a monocle anymore, right? And jeans, that's true. Jeans in English is plural. And again, it's because it's a pair of jeans, pair of glasses, pair of scissors. So we only really use these ones in the plural. And mostly oh yeah, another word that comes to mind is pants. Pants are also like jeans and glasses and scissors. We name these in the plural too. Uh, but what else we got? The most commonly used letter is E. Is it? I'm looking for. Yep, they confirmed it for me. Is E in English anyway because the letter E appears in 11% of words. So no wonder in the um, in Wheel of Fortune at the very end, when they have one person guessing the last word or phrase, they give them R, S, T, L, N, and E because these are the most commonly used letters in English, pretty much. But no wonder the E is the vowel they give them. That's very helpful of them, isn't it? But yeah, that does not surprise me at all because E appears so many times in English. And that's why if you're playing Scrabble, you're going to need to use the language that this version of Scrabble was built for, because Scrabble has a certain amount of letters in it, and a certain amount of each letter, now is determined by how frequently different letters are used. So don't go ahead and try to use an English language Scrabble game to play Scrabble in French, for instance, because I've tried it and it did not work out well so often. And that's because it didn't have the right number of letters to be to be making a lot of words in the French. Anyway, so yeah, E is the most commonly used letter in English. Apparently, that's cool. And then over 200 languages are made up. This is true. There are a lot of languages called constructed languages, which did not evolve naturally or spontaneously in human civilization like they usually do, like the case of Nicaraguan Sign Language that I talked about earlier. There's a lot of languages that are made up for television shows, movies, books, literature, and things like that. Like, for example, did you know there were many languages made for the Lord of the Rings books, right? And which, of course, became a film series as well. A lot of different languages made up for that. Same goes for the TV show, well, many TV shows, Star Trek. The Star Trek franchise, they have made up a lot of languages for that. For instance, you got Klingon, is the most famous constructed language that people know from there. But yeah, there are a couple hundred languages documented that were totally made up. And a lot of them are problematic because they're not always so fully developed that we can all use them in the real world, because they have very limited purposes on the screen or in the book or anything like that. But yeah, a couple hundred of made up languages. And that's all to make works of science fiction and fantasy much more interesting, right? To add a little culture into the mix. So yeah, a couple hundred made up languages. I get that. One country has 840 languages. Oh, I know this one already. Papua New Guinea. That is the most linguistically diverse country in the world, which is surprising, because their total population is not huge, right? They don't have, you know, anywhere near 1 billion people like China or anything like that. They have, I think, the number, or not even in the hundreds of millions like the US. They have, I think, about 10 million people. I think the population of Papua New Guinea is about 10 million people. And yet still, they have more languages spoken there than any other country. And especially, I did mention how New York City has like 800 languages spoken there, but in the US, not so many of those languages are used overall. And we saw earlier the US is considered like 300 languages, but with such a larger population than that, whereas Papua New Guinea, with a population of about 10 million people, has 840 languages, which makes on average 84 languages for every million people. Wow, that's interesting. And I do wonder how many languages does the average person from Papua New Guinea speak, right? Because you would think, yeah, that many of them must speak several languages, to help be the most linguistically diverse country in the world. And then only 100 words per day. This ties into something I said earlier, how our English, we have 4,000 words added to our dictionaries every year. But I said how people don't use that many different words in a day. On the average, the typical person, I'm assuming here they mean the typical English speaker. I don't know how many other languages they considered, but but I'll give them credit, thinking that maybe they did consider other languages too. But the average person in a typical day, uses only about 100 words when speaking. And so that's not saying that in reading and writing they don't use more, but when speaking, yeah, only about 100 words per day. And that's because when we're speaking, we tend to prefer monosyllabic words that only have one or two syllables. And so we broaden them out a little bit in their meaning to cover a lot more ground. But yeah, that's interesting because it's so sad in a way because our language has so many thousands of words. So how come we're ignoring most of them most of the time when we're speaking? Anyway, that to me really interesting. And synonymless. What is that about? Synonym is the only word in English that doesn't have synonyms. That to me is kind of funny. I mean, yeah, we could use more than one word to come up with a paraphrase for a synonym. Uh, but yeah, that's pretty funny because the word synonym means uh, multiple words that mean just about the same thing, although they're not perfect synonyms. They often mean things that are closely related, but a little different. And it's funny that that of all words would not have any synonyms. That to me, really funny. And I think this next one is our last one. Shakespeare invented 1,700 words. One of literature's greatest invented 1,700 words, including critic, bandit, and elbow as a verb. That's true. Shakespeare did invent a ton of words and phrases in English, of course. And oh, by the way, I've done a couple of videos about synonyms. I mean, about Shakespeare, and I did, I think, one video about phrases that we can accredit to Shakespeare, a lot of interesting phrases that Shakespeare gave us. Um, but I did a couple of videos about words that people credit Shakespeare um, for the creation of. But it turns out a lot of these can be easily debunked because all you have to do is find a reference to that word and a use of that word before Shakespeare was born. And I found quite a few of them. So please do, yeah, on my channel, you'll be able to find those ones too. Um, anyway, so Shakespeare, yeah, he invented hundreds of words, literally, but I will caution you that he's given credit for even more words than that. So I wouldn't give him always credit. Every time somebody says Shakespeare invented the word, especially Oxford English Dictionary credits Shakespeare with a lot of words, and he didn't actually invent all of them. So I will warn you about that. So thanks for watching me react to all these supposed mind-blowing facts about language. There's Shakespeare. That's an anachronism if I've ever seen one. Shakespeare on a laptop, right? Anyway, that'll be a word of the day, anachronism. Anyway, but yeah, I just want to make sure we're not missing any. That's right, we're not missing any. So thanks again for watching this little video, and please do give it a thumbs up. I would really appreciate that so much. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, please do consider subscribing. I would really appreciate that because it would help tiny little YouTube channel like mine grow so much. So yeah, thanks again for sticking around for this video, and thank you so much for watching all the way to the end because it really makes a big difference in the YouTube algorithms. So thank you so much for that. I'm looking very much forward to talking to you in future videos and live streams. So until then, catch you around next time. Bye bye.